Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I am Billy Embody. This week, we recap some final thoughts on SMU's 42-13 win over East Texas A&M. Of course, we talked to Rhett Lashlee on this Tuesday as you're listening to this. We got some key injury updates, but most importantly, some major blue chip recruits were in Ford Stadium for that win over East Texas A&M. We'll break all that down and more on this edition of the On the Pony Express podcast, presented by our friends at Northwest Insurance Agency.
You can't plan for everything, but you can be ready for anything. That's where we come in. Northwest Insurance Agency covers the wait, what? Moments in life with real coverage, real people, and real fast help. We offer sombrero-style coverage that protects your possessions, your loved ones, and everything else that fits under a sombrero. Call us today for a quote at 855-887-5656 or visit us at nwagencies.com.
This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody.
1, 2, 3, let we go.
That's right. It is Tuesday. Glad to be back with you guys after a long weekend, Labor Day weekend. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Got out on the boulevard, of course, and dodged the rain and weather to see SMU win a 42-13 contest with East Texas A&M. Get by that one. Now you face Baylor. We're presented by our friends at Northwest Insurance Agency, and we've got a jam-packed show for you guys today. Later tonight, record with Hayden Howerton. The QB Chronicles podcast returned as well, and we have a special edition to the On the Pony Express family that has just been signed off on. So excited for that. Trying to get it all dialed in for this weekend. It might be next, but nonetheless, a huge piece of news for us today that we're really excited to share with you guys at ontheponyexpress.com, which you can subscribe for just $1. So make sure you subscribe today. We're really looking forward to this, but jam-packed schedule all week now as the season is here. Myself, Hayden Howerton, Dean Rawlski, everybody involved with this on the network. So we appreciate you guys subscribing to our channel as well as on theponyexpress.com. All right, let's jump in here. SMU wins over the weekend, 42-13 over East Texas A&M. And for me, and on the message board, got grief from one poster, which is fine. Everybody has their opinions. But I use the words dominant yet sloppy. And they are contradictory by themselves. Those words, together with context, I feel like describe what we saw from SMU over the weekend. They were dominant. They were up 21-0, 40 seconds into the second quarter. The game was never in doubt. That is controlling the game completely. You know, save for a 30-yard run in the second quarter, I think East Texas A&M would have had something like 20 yards on the ground in the first half. They gained 120-something yards in the fourth quarter alone with the backups in. You know, SMU didn't play perfect, though. And they certainly weren't their best. And they weren't even great. They were good. You know, they were fine. Nothing crazy. And that, I feel like, with 2 defensive touchdowns as well, which can skew offensive stats and take away valuable time that they could be possessing the football and moving the ball, created this 42-13 win. You know, nearly a 30-point spread, which is fine against a team like East Texas A&M. Nothing to write home about. But yet the team was dominant versus the team they were facing. They were in complete control. That is dominance to me. And at the same time, because of the team that they played, they were able to be sloppy and yet win 42-13. So they're really, though, in that game, when you lose 2 key players like they did, one on each side of the ball, Jordan Hudson and Alexander Kilgore, in the early stages of the game, can certainly impact you. You know, SMU came out and they really started the game pretty well. You know, that's about as good as you could have asked. You know, they forced a punt of East Texas A&M, and you know, that came on the heels of SMU going 3 plays, 75 yards with a touchdown to Romello Brinson to lead the game off. You know, that's how you want to start. But at the same time, you lose Jordan Hudson And then you end up getting that interception returned for a touchdown by Alexander Kilgore, and he gets hurt and you lose him. And yeah, there are two key position groups now impacted by those things. The rotation at the linebacker position, we've talked a lot about that. That's going to be a deep room of rotating players. You have Zakai Barker starting next to Alexander Kilgore, but then you add in Brandon Maiazono, Justin Medlock, Brandon Booker, all rotating. That's 5 guys. We didn't really see 4 guys rotating for SMU in the 2024 season with Kobe Wilson, Ahmad Walker, and Alexander Kilgore. Somebody, I want to almost say Kilgore, gets nicked up maybe midway through the season, maybe somewhere in there. Maybe it was Florida State even. And Brandon Maiazono gets some good snaps before he gets hurt against Duke. I think he got hurt on a special teams play. But that puts in context the amount of players that are rotating at this position. Granted, you have your 2 starters. Those are the guys you would like to play a good bit and get them out. But with 3 other mouths to feed, there's a lot that's going on for Zakai Barker, for Brandon Booker, for Justin Medlock. Those 3 guys didn't, either one, in Zakai Barker's case, didn't play for SMU last year, or 2, Brandon Booker and Justin Medlock didn't play a ton defensive snaps for SMU last year. Brandon Maiazono, same thing, kind of got hurt. That's been a thing. There is a lot of changes to that rotation. Jordan Hudson going down on play 1 nuked SMU's wide receiver rotation right off the bat. Now, Jalen Cooper came in and played well. Finishes with second leading receiver for SMU behind Romello Brinson with 5 receptions, 73 yards, and his first collegiate touchdown. Great job for the 4-star wide receiver that SMU beat out Notre Dame for. Kind of bet CJ Carr maybe would have liked to have him against Miami over the weekend. But it's still going to impact some things from a timing perspective and kind of what you'd expect against any team. But all of this was kind of, I think, not the main things that impacted SMU. SMU was impacted by penalties. As Rhett Lashlee said, one holding that he knows was a hold, and the other, not so much. You might get that in a game against Baylor. You might see that where the officials call some things that don't go your way. There was the offside jump. There was this. There was that. It was a bunch of little things that, if they continue throughout the season, again, with SMU's schedule, will be issues. Will they be chalked up to game 1? That's what we're going to find out really quickly, 11 a.m. Central against Baylor on the CW this weekend. So as I kind of try to put a bow on this game for SMU, I see a lot of things that were first game that you can chalk up to it being the first time you were out on the field playing against certain people. Like watching Chris Johnson cut back for his touchdown run. I think it was 22-yard touchdown run. We didn't see that in fall camp. You don't see those type of plays because for the most part, if you're running 11 on 11, you're either getting a thud there or guys are tagging off. That's where SMU's at as a program. They do some tackling. They do some of that in fall camp, but they don't do a ton of it. So when he cuts it back and finds the lane and kind of outruns everybody, and you're like, wow, that is really impressive stuff that we did not know we would find out about until you turn the lights on. TJ Harden's ability to yards after contact, that's something that really kind of stood out to me with him. 8 carries, 42 yards, 5.3 yards per carry. It's pretty good. When you look at CJ Johnson's, the rest of his day outside of that 22-yard touchdown run, 5 carries for 22 yards, that would be a solid, little bit more than 4 yards a carry. TJ Harden, 8 carries, 42 yards, long of 11, pretty good, over 5 yards a carry. And again, this is an offense that the total rushing numbers are going to be skewed because Kevin Jennings gets sacked on, what was that crazy offsides, could have been an offsides type of play. And that scuttles SMU's chance, I believe, if I have that timing right, of scoring at the end of toward the end of the half. So there's a bunch of things that you can kind of chalk up to first game. And that's the great thing about this week is there's no bye week. That was one of the first things I said on the message board. you don't have a bye. So you don't have to sit here and either talk about it until your face is blue of all the things that SMU did right or wrong, like what happened last year with BYU, and have to stew on it and then have a game to play 2 full weeks later. You don't even have to wake up and change out your PJs if you're not going to the game on Saturday. Yeah, that's how quickly we're going to find out. You're going to read on the ponyexpress.com right away because I'm sure we'll have the latest on the key injuries SMU's dealing with. And then you're going to pour yourself a mimosa or your beverage of choice, maybe make some breakfast tacos if you're at home, and you're going to flip on the CW and watch SMU Baylor. Be like that. Be 2:30 in the afternoon before we'll know it, and we'll either know SMU has a team that was shaking off the rust in game one, or they've got a lot bigger things that they've got to address, similar to last year. But I don't think they're going to be making a quarterback change by any means. Kevin Jennings is their guy that he's a ride or die this year, and he's going to be good, in my opinion. Over 70% completion percentage. Really had some couple drops. He had 2 drops. He had 2 throws out of 30 that were deemed by PFF as turnover worthy. One, of course, was intercepted, bad throw, bad route, all of those things. We're going to find out really quickly this season whether or not SMU has a lot to clean up. And if we're going to be sitting here in November saying, wow, look at the changes SMU made, because SMU hasn't lost a game in November since 2022, by the way, or if they're going to be a team that's out of the ACC championship race and you say, okay, this team was flawed here, flawed there. They probably are making a bowl game and they're probably going to still have a decent season. I don't think there's going to be any bottom falling out long term, but you're still looking at a football team that has high aspirations. It has a talent group that should be able to get them firmly in that ACC championship race. And if you see what happened to Baylor this past weekend against Auburn, you should be feeling that based on what you saw when SMU was at its best against East Texas A&M, which I still don't think is a great thing to look at and have anything concrete to take away from because of the talent discrepancy, because of all of those things. You're still feeling like, okay, Auburn ran all over Baylor. SMU didn't run Kevin Jennings with designed runs. They barely had the tight ends involved. Of course, they lose Jordan Hudson right off the bat. There's a lot of things that SMU didn't show. It was obvious. And we'll find out if they're for real or not right off the bat against Baylor this coming weekend. And at the end of the day, though, I still am picking SMU to beat Baylor. I mean, I saw a Baylor team that is pretty flawed. I thought they had a good game plan. I just think they are flawed personnel-wise. And you could argue that Dave Aranda, as a defensive coordinator, which he is calling the plays defensively, is just a step behind some of these offenses right now. Baylor has not been good defensively in his entire tenure, save for one season. I think it was 2021 or 22, 23, something in there. There's that reality. So SMU, they've got a lot to fix. Rhett Lashlee today seemed pretty upbeat, in a good mood. Did not seem concerned too much about what his team put out there this past weekend. You can kind of sometimes tell when I think Rhett is coming off the field where there was a bad practice, that he was disappointed with his team's effort, and you can tell when he's pretty happy, because he was pretty smooth, let off, making fun of me right off the bat, which is always an easy target. So that's something to read into, or if you're into that. But before we kind of break down what Rhett shared today, I do want to remind you guys that we are presented by our friends at StatusJet, statusjet.com. Reach out to David Henry and his team today and learn about your options for games like Missouri State coming up. Book that trip. Don't be flying with Dean on that 5 a.m. American flight out Saturday morning. We love Dean for doing that, but make sure you book with StatusJet. Round trip flight. When you book it with them and you mention on the Pony Express, you get a discount with our friends at StatusJet. So reach out to them today and book the trip of a lifetime for Missouri State. But really, book that Clemson trip, book that Wake Forest trip with our friends at Status Jet today. And also, we do want to remind you guys that we are also presented by our friends at Mignon. Mignon in Plano, been serving incredible food at it right in the Plano area, right there on Preston Road, just south of the HEB for decades now. Whether it be your brunch on Sunday that is world class, or sitting at the bar for happy hour, or having dinner, an elegant dinner, whether it be a small group, or you can plan your private dinner with a larger group there at Mignon. Take advantage of the patio. It's kind of nice this week. But Mignon is SMU owned. Former SMU offensive lineman Nick Nator and his family have owned it for years and produced an incredible scene of dining at a very fine level, as well as great cocktails. They've got the brunch on Sundays only. And we encourage you to make the trip over to see our friends at Mignon in Plano and find out why it's one of our favorite restaurants that we hit. So we appreciate Mignon for supporting the On the Pony Express podcast as well. So Rhett Lashlee didn't really, just right off the bat, let's get the elephant out of the room. Jordan Hudson and Alexander Kilgore go down with injuries in this game. Both are on the sidelines. Jordan Hudson in a sling, Alexander Kilgore in a boot. Not great. That's not what you want to see. What Rhett Lashlee said is they are day-to-day, which is a good thing. That means there's no tear. There's x-rays that are negative per Rhett Lashlee. That is what I'm hearing on my end. For those of you who are at ontheponyexpress.com, that's also what we're hearing. Now, will they play? You'll have to find out at ontheponyexpress.com. I'm sure on Saturday morning we will let the cat out of the bag on that one. And SMU did close practice this week. They're also closing practice for the TCU game. They did this last year as well for TCU, so it's a very similar path. This is a big game. This is a game that, for Dave Aranda, he's got to win. He's got a huge buyout from what everybody has reported. But, he also really has not lived up to, what the early kind of trending direction of that program was when they played for a Big 12 championship. And it's starting to fall off. They rolled at the end of last year, and that kind of saved him in a way. But this year, after losing to Auburn, this is the first time that they're getting to play SMU in a minute. SMU hasn't beaten Baylor since the 1980s. Huge opportunity for SMU to really kind of turn a narrative here, of course, which is kind of weird narrative, since the 80s. SMU and Baylor really haven't played a ton, and the programs have been in two totally different directions here. But both coaches are kind of taking that gamesmanship approach right now with injuries. Jackie Marshall, big-time defensive lineman for Baylor, is day-to-day per Dave Aranda. But look, I think the broadcast reported it was a sprain. Big guys with ankle sprains, really, really tough to see him playing. I'll be wrong. I don't cover Baylor. That's my opinion on defensive linemen that sprain an ankle and are immediately ruled out against an SEC team in week 1. That I have a tough time seeing him back in action next week, because similar to SMU needs Jordan Hudson. They need Alexander Kilgore for ACC play. Baylor needs Jackie Marshall for Big 12 play. I pick Baylor to win the Big 12. That's my pick. I think Sawyer Robertson's great. I think SMU secondary is going to have a lot to deal with this weekend against the Bears. This is a tight end in Michael Trigg, who went to my high school, Tampa Carrollwood Day, shout out, that is coming off a really impressive performance. Physically, he looks the part. SMU did a great job on Tyler Warren in the college football playoff. They did a really, really good job against an All-American tight end. Maybe they take some of that and do some of that against him. Baylor has some tricky players in a sense. At the same time, Sawyer Robertson got knocked around pretty good by that Auburn front. And yes, Auburn has that SEC defensive line talent. That was a reason why I picked Auburn to win at Baylor and cover. And that group that Auburn rolled out there is very good. And for talking with different people, the offensive line at Baylor, veteran, returning a lot of guys, but not necessarily this strength. They're big, they're physical, but they aren't necessarily elite. And for SMU, who beat Auburn out for Jeffrey Embody and also Terry Webb, they've got some guys on there that Auburn wanted. Maybe that's a good eval situation there. Terry Webb showed some of you guys watching on the game film why we were so high on him in the spring. Called him a guy who could very well end up playing in the NFL. There's also depth at SMU. There's 5 guys that they feel probably comfortable with right now. I was talking with a couple people, around the program over the last couple days. It said, what are some of your takeaways? What they kind of feel like is, okay, we did really well recruiting the defensive line. We've got depth. We've got edge guys. We've got this. We've got that. Akil Washington didn't play. He at least posted on Instagram he's expected back. DeMarge Lewis wasn't dressed out. We'll have to ask about him. But what they have is depth. They have guys that can play. They don't have a Elijah Roberts from what it looks like, although Cam Robertson had a really good game. They don't have a guy who athletically could, if he's ever up to his potential, Jared Harrison Hunt could be a day 2 guy if he could run it all back and do it all over again. He's got that talent level at least. They don't necessarily have that. What they have is they have a deeper stable of guys that they trust this year to make plays. And that's what SMU is going to bring into the Baylor game. Will that end up being proven right? We will find out. Will it be enough to do all the things that SMU has on its agenda to do this year? We'll find out. Because I'm a big, you've got to have a couple studs. And SMU has it in Ahmad Moses and Isaiah Wacobia. You can see that on the back end. They've got guys like Isaiah Smith and Cam Robertson, and DJ Warner really looks like he's going to be a good player in the long run. And Terry Webb, Jeffrey Embody, they would like to see a little bit more out of. But this is where you can see these guys take their game to the next level. When you watch Baylor and Auburn, Baylor already had this type of a game. When they needed to play really, really well and really, really hard, they did, but they didn't execute the way they could have. Baylor is capable. This is not a team that, Baylor's receiving votes, I think, in the AP poll. I'm good with that. Like I said, I picked them to win the Big 12. But there were some things that you can already say, okay, Baylor has these issues because they played at least an SEC opponent and one that athletically is capable. SMU, you don't know as much about because you played an FCS school. So there's a little bit of give and take there. Is SMU going to raise its level of play and effort level and attention to detail and all of those things that they have to this week to beat Baylor? I mean, SMU's played pretty well at home, save for that BYU game. Again, kind of quarterback, situation going on at that point. But when they've had Kevin Jennings at the helm, they've been pretty darn good at home. I mean, they've been cooking at home. And this is another opportunity for SMU to do that this weekend. Rhett Lashlee did talk about how he grew up in the Southwest Conference. He grew up where the goal was getting to the Cotton Bowl or getting to Reunion Arena for the Southwest Conference Championship. He knows about Arkansas and all the Texas schools and all of those things that the Southwest Conference was all about. And he knows this game means a lot to SMU fans. And it does. SMU and Baylor are supposed to play next year as well. Big game. Similar to TCU in 2 weeks. Huge game. These games against Baylor and TCU, they don't mean bleep. They don't mean anything as far as what SMU can accomplish as far as playing for a conference championship, which then gets you generally into a college football playoff. It's kind of been proven. And by the way, Alabama kind of took a hit on their stance on that over the weekend. So if SMU loses these 2 games, it goes and runs through the ACC, they're going to be playing in the college football playoff, even if they lose in Charlotte. They go undefeated in league play again. But they mean a lot for everybody that goes into an office, everybody that goes into work and or sees somebody at a country club or at a concert or at a kid's sporting event. That's where these games, they mean, sorry to use this pun, they mean more. They do. And that's where SMU can't put all of its eggs into winning these games, which is why SMU in their approach of, one play at a time, game by game, week by week, Those type of approaches are so important here, because if you have that culture that buys into that and sticks with that, you're going to be competitive. You're going to play really hard. You should have good attention to detail. And that's where the care level and competitiveness can help you win a football game. When you're so dialed in one week at a time, we saw what happened with that with SMU last year. We saw that. They would not look ahead. Once they figured out, hey, all right, we tweaked the offensive line. Kevin Jennings is now the quarterback. Couple things on defense. They locked in week by week and they rolled. Does this team have that right now? This is the most important game on their schedule right now. And if that's their approach and that's what they're sticking with, they should be competitive. They should be ready to go on Saturday. By the way, underrated thing here, and this is just an opinion, I think 8 o'clock kick, even if it was 7, that could be the sleepiness that we saw from SMU if you watched. And I know they're going to have to play 7 o'clock games and things like that. But, man, this is a team built on getting up and going and playing. That's what they like to do. They like football. They love it. They want to get up and play. Sitting around the hotel all day, maybe do some meetings, watch some games, play some cards, whatever they do. Not great. Not great for this team. So 11 a.m. kick against Baylor. I think SMU is going to be ready for it. I think both teams are going to be ready for it. They both have their own very different bad taste in their mouth after their game 1 of this season. So who executes, who plays harder, who has the attention to detail to win, that's where we're going to find out, of course, 11 a.m. Against Baylor on Saturday. So with that, do want to remind you guys, of course, about our friends at the Thomas Auto Group. Make sure you head up 75 McKinney and visit any of their 4 dealerships, Ford, Subaru, Volkswagen, and Mitsubishi. I've got later this month my oil change scheduled. Really excited to get up there and have that taken care of by my friends at Brandon Thomas Mitsubishi. They do great work there. Great comfortable setting for me to sit, get some work done, all of that. So make sure you go to thomasautogroup.com, learn more about the Thomas Promise, and of course, get employee pricing on new and pre-owned vehicles when you mention on the Pony Express. Let's wrap up with a few prospects that did make it to campus this weekend. SMU and the recruiting staff put together sneakily, you could argue, one of the best recruiting weekends and games of the entire week 1 slate. They are loaded with prospects that made it to campus, loaded with prospects on the defensive line in particular. We'll run down a couple of those for you guys, but 2 of them that I want to lead off with on the defensive line are 2 of the nation's best players and guys who have been to SMU a half dozen times. Jalen Brewster, Cedar Hill defensive lineman, the number 1 defensive lineman in the entire country, came to SMU for its season opener. And he'll go and make other visits, and he'll hit some other games. He'll probably be back at SMU. But he's on the sideline. He's got an SMU hat. He's talking to Rhett Lashlee. He's talking to Calvin Thibodeau. I talked to him after the game. He knows how big of a priority he is. He knows really just what SMU, what he means to SMU if they can keep him home. And I don't know if that's going to be enough to win this recruiting battle. Jalen Brewster is getting recruited by programs all over the country: Oklahoma, Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. That's going to be blue bloods all over the place type of recruitment. SMU, of course, among them for our friends out there on Twitter. He is, man, if you look at the Jalen Brewster recruitment, if there's one to circle as far as who is going to be this year's Drew Evers, and Jalen and Drew are very different people, but SMU was not talked about enough with Drew Evers, even though he was there a dozen times over the course of his recruitment. Jalen Brewster has been to SMU multiple times now. He's probably been there 5 times. He's just so quiet, doesn't really do much on social media. He's somebody that, if that's your 2027 version of Drew Evers, look out. I mean, that by that time when he makes his decision, you want to be hitting a Jalen Brewster. You really do. So keep an eye on him. He's been here a bunch now. Another big-time defensive tackle who really checks the boxes physically. Amari Vickerson was in town, came up from Houston. There's a couple Houston guys well represented at SMU, but Amari Vickerson is one I want to touch on. He is somebody that SMU has really recruited hard. If you're looking for somebody that is probably a little bit of a safe-ish bet, I would say Amari Vickerson is your safe. Like if I was doing a class prediction piece, and I don't want to give a bunch away, but man, I would heavily consider putting Amari Vickerson in there. You know, he's somebody that really checks the boxes of the type of kid that SMU likes, the type of demeanor. He's got the size, he's got physicality. He's somebody to keep an eye on, I would say, and especially since he made the trip up for a game, that says a lot. So he made it to town, and then SMU also had another guy who's been to campus a bunch, Zane Rowe from Denton Guyer, top 100 prospect, top 15 edge prospect nationally. Just kind of checks all the boxes physically. I think these are a lot of 2027 prospects because that's where we're already at as far as covering recruiting, because 2026 is pretty much done. You have somebody here that, 2 years he would walk on your campus. And DJ Warner, I think if my math is correct, would be entering his final season. He would still be here. You'd have Ja'Kai Lang, who would still be here. But then after that, then you'd have somebody who could play right away. You would have that next up guy. And that's really worth noting when it comes to recruiting Zane Rowe, who has programs like Oklahoma, just schools all over the place coming after him. Texas has hosted him, Nebraska, Texas Tech, and others. SMU has done a really good job here early on. He comes to hang out a good bit, which is kind of what you want. Let's flip over to the offensive line side of things. And Alexander Herrera, and SMU had Papunga Katoa, which I'm really excited to show you guys a piece that I've been working on about Toa and his family. So stay tuned for that. That'll be a special one that'll drop on Wednesday. Alexander Herrera is called Big Country, and Big Country was back at SMU. He's made a number of visits already, and they're looking to get him on board. Huge priority. He's going to go make a ton of visits this year. He's going to go visit Nebraska, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, Arizona State, Arkansas. He's got a bunch. So he's going to go through his process, and then we'll kind of see. But he's been a big priority. Matt McHugh, new director of offensive player personnel for SMU, was his offensive coordinator at Crowley. And SMU, of course, is recruiting Tay Ellis as well, one of the best prospects in the country from Crowley. So Herrera gets back at SMU. He's got a bunch of visits, but he's kind of been a consistent visitor as well here. And then one guy who's really starting to tick up here is Trenton Yancey, who's a 4-star prospect out of Duncanville. I think really looks the part of like a Roderick Daniels type. I know he's listed at 6 foot. He might be a shade, shorter than that, but really dynamic. Somebody that SMU has recruited for a while. Watching him on the sideline, he had a Dallas jacket on, by the way. He dapping up guys like Zay and Tyron Polley and just all of these players that SMU has on its roster from Dallas. He looks like a guy that is really buying in to staying at home and playing for SMU. So we'll see very early, 2027, again, a lot of these guys, but hanging out with Braylon Edwards, a 2026 SMU commit who's at Duncanville, hanging out with Zach Turner, a 2026 commit at Duncanville. Those are the things that SMU is really hoping continue to pay off with these Dallas guys. And Trenton Yancey was a big one that was also on campus. So don't want to give away all of our scoop. Of course, we have the full visitor list at ontheponyexpress.com. You can subscribe for just $1. There's a cool deal we have going with The Athletic as well. So check that out. Make sure you subscribe. And we've had a bunch of growth. But, we set last year, if you think about it, SMU had just gotten its first year into the ACC. Like, the buildup was huge. This year, we're crushing our numbers. It's awesome. So really appreciate all you guys reading, watching, listening. But be on the website, be on the message board. That's where it's at. We just had another live chat again on Monday. So looking forward to keeping those rolling throughout the season. But hey, it's time to get out of here. Going to record with our friend Hayden Howerton tonight. So make sure you give a listen to that when that drops as well. And make sure you drop a line to Mark Villasana and Northwest Insurance Agency, 214-352-5656, or email him info@nwagencies.com today, and make him talk about how your policy can be fixed, how your coverage can be improved, and he can review all of that for you. And also talk about some SMU football, man. He's one of the proud supporters of On the Pony Express and, of course, the Mustangs. So make sure you guys reach out to Northwest Insurance Agency, as well as Status Jet, Thomas Auto Group, Mignon in Plano, and all of our sponsors. We really appreciate them and appreciate you guys for listening to this edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. So got a lot more content and podcasting coming your way this week. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you next time on another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU on 3 and on Instagram at on3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.